Welcome back. It's our pleasure to introduce our last participant for this edition of the Curators Hub. Tanzim Wahab is curator, cultural practitioner based in Dhaka and Berlin. He is the festival director of Chobi Mela. He is also working at a new initiative in Berlin called Spore as the curator and community facilitator. And a lot of Tanzim's work as a cultural alliance builder, I would say, has been pivotal for myself and so many of us to really try and find ways of thinking together and challenging prevalent infrastructural conditions and work from within them too. He's also worked at the Bengal Foundation before, and so in all of these different capacities been an extremely generous ally, and it means a lot to have him return here as a participant. He has attended before with other friends from Bangladesh. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Natasha, for very generous and kind introduction. Here is the slide. Okay. I hope this pointer works. Otherwise, I act out and an invisible hand somehow helps me. Oh, super. So, okay, we start with this. Talking about passport and South Asian solidarity. Well, so it took me a while to manage visa for India. When I was at the embassy, they were saying Bangladeshi applicant needs 15 to 20 days. So long story short, experimenter worked brilliantly day or night. And the amount of difficulty I gave them, I doubt they'll think twice before inviting me again. But there is also a success story. I'm now officially recorded. You see.
For attending.
So I have a. So it's good for us. It's win-win. So I have this special endorsement for attending the hub. And that's why I'm in this pilgrimage, and I'm very quiet because I'm not doing anything. I'm not allowed to do anything else because change of purpose is not allowed. Okay, so I'm just very aware about it. But I'm all yours, experimenter now. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I don't know how to make the long story short, but it's only 30 minutes. So I was just wondering what should I talk about. Chobi Mela started in 2000, and it's been quite an interesting journey for us with lots of ups and downs, but I was thinking rather I'll talk about the spirit of co-curatorial that we try out. We'll just try to take a short flight towards the past, but we'll try to land towards the most recent edition we had, Chobi Mela Shunno. After completing 10 editions, we are not encouraging to have the 11th edition. We rather went backwards. So we wanted a rewind. And maybe this story will try to unfold there. Let's see how it goes. Time is short. So, okay, as I was saying, Chobi Mela started with a very simple necessity. You know, it all started with a necessity. You know what Chobi Mela means, most of you. It's Chobi and Mela. It's a photo festival, and once we started in 2000, we felt there was no other platform showing lens-based artwork in South Asia in a festival format. So yeah, the purpose was really simple. We started for the people who are excluded in the mainstream art practice, but at the same time, talking about art, the festival was also kind of baggage-free because we didn't have any kind of art historical temporality in mind. Or there was no institutional curators represented there. And it was really important for us to see what is the necessity and how we define and redefine it. And a school helped us a lot. So the school Pathshala was founded just a couple of years before the festival. Pashala is a very ancient schooling system, most of us know here. But it brought us very interesting ideas of looking into the tree, ground, thinking of being grounded sometimes, and also the platform, what does it mean? Is it a mere form or a platform? So we just play around with the words in mind. Oh. So for us, this curatorial process started with thinking about placemaking, how a place becomes a safe place, and how it helps to gather together and regathering, and who are gathering there. And that's really important in this process of dialogue. And it brings us back to this tree. We were talking about horizontality yesterday, but looking back to tree, I'm not trying to romanticize this tree school idea, but still, it allows you to think beyond the confinement of classroom. And if you always look horizontally, you see just, it's an eye level. So what are the non-human perspectives, So tree grows vertical. At the same time, it helps you to look at the sky and the leaf, and also the shade and the ground, and helps to also think beyond the human presence. And also it gives you different angle to look into the exhibition. So this is one of the early exhibitions organized by Drik, who's also a very important partner of Chobi Mela. I'll talk more about these institutions. But yes, you see, there's a very different angle for an audience to see the exhibition from the tree. So tree has many different benefits. And the school also relies on tree. It's not so easy to find banyan tree, but sometimes we manage mango tree. And we also exhibit. So this photo is of one of the Chobi Mela editions where a Pathshala alumni is showing photos in Charukala, Dhaka University's Fine Art department, under the tree. And these are the shades we get in the school. So for us, this community of interest is really important to see not only, how we present or represent us, what we do and why we do, to whom it is represented, who's benefiting from it. And it's an ongoing challenge, it's an endless challenge to define and redefine your audience, but also to go beyond this traditional audience development, mediation, and to think, who you are inviting, with what kind of warmth and hospitality. And it's also easy to invite people in Dhaka, it's a saturated city. So for any event, there'll be footfall, so that's not the challenge, I think we are looking for, footfall or the head count. It's something more than that, right? Alliance, ally, and how you actually work on the partnerships in future. Talking about this, people-centric initiative, or seeing who are these individuals and not the numbers. So this is a very interesting photo for us. It reminds me of our first batch of Pathshala when the school started. And you see there were only 12 students, but one photo is missing. And someone also, Piu, he was a student first and teacher, he passed away sadly. Okay, so we have this triangular synergy, and that's how Chobi Mela works. We have Pathshala, the school, Drik is a photo agency and a photo archive. And for us, again, co-curatorial doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't have autonomy, but it's mostly like looking into the collective autonomy, but also not relying a lot on your solo authorship. And for us, it was fine, because as we're saying, we're not operating in art industry with museums, with galleries. So that disconnection was also pushing us to find another connection. But looking beyond that, looking beyond your friendship, your community, your gathering, how you define world. So let me read it out. The world view is not the view of the world, but the world understood as a view. So there are different conversations about, this view, representation and all. But again, we didn't want to fall into this trap of this binary of, again, looking into the vertical relationship of global north upwards, global south downwards. Beyond that stream, it could be seen as more like a circular proximity. So this is a permaculture example, mostly coming from nature and how you organize the environment. But you see the proximity is very different, right? There are different zones. Some are close, but it's not only your physical distance. It's more like who comes in, who goes out, and what is the access point and how you relate to places. So there are some unmanaged areas as well, zone 5. But that's okay, you know, that's okay. And there are some less intensively managed areas as well too, because you talk about an open horizontal democratic space, some things can get really intensive. So sometimes distance also is better. So it's always, you know, a dilemma. But it's a constant fight within the community for doing something together for a cause. We also talked about Majority World, the founder of Chobi Mela, Shahidul Alam. He's very upfront and vocal about it. It's also very simple, like the word Chobi Mela, you know, it's a majority world. So there are many worlds in one world, and that's a pluriversality. And you see, the most people lives in what place is also very important and relevant, you know, where the majority of the people living, and what is their interest, what is their politics. It's really important for us to see it in a very simplistic way than framing us as a developing South Asian emerging space. But we keep play with this notion of not only the map world, but also with the map, this cartography. And in the last edition of Chobi Mela, we talked a lot about forming a solidarity network, focusing a lot on translocality, finding locals in different regions and how you weave it in a very complex way together, but not buying that nation state collaboration and corporation and the continental diversity and all. Okay, so the tree is the placemaking in a rural setting, but it also adds up to the street, which is for us an urban setting, and also it's part of our curatorial. It's not beyond that from the gallery and room setup. So you see, traditionally Chobi Mela starts with a rally. People are in the streets. That's also a gathering. That's also audience, and it's unlimited. And we are dancing together. We are rallying, playing music, and what else we are not doing. And the rally continues. I'm going to bombard with you with lots of images, but yeah, that will help me to stay quiet a bit. So you see, I'm sure you hear the music, but also, you know, the exhibition is also moving around in different places. It's not always successful. It keeps the same question of the power dynamics and, how you edit or, you know, select a certain kind of work, who's the audience, and what does it mean to their life. These questions are there, but it's a way of, you know, trying out many different methods to, you know, go beyond the gravity and the confinement of the room setting. So the exhibition moves around the Parliament building in Dhaka. Here is the Parliament, interesting space, talking about democracy, especially now. Won't talk much though, but you see. Rickshaw. And also outdoor settings and these kind of slideshows at night gives us this amount of audience sitting. But, well, street is also not so much romanticized sometimes, you know. It's the real location for many things. I'll come to that, but this is one of the early exhibitions in a public library of Nepal Picture Library. Many years ago, I think 10 years ago, we had an edition where, the Nepal Picture Library initiative just started with Nayantara, and this is one of the early exhibitions. This is in an abandoned theater space. So public intervention in different places was really important. But as I was saying, the street was not always about celebrating. So we all were gathering there together for the justice for Irfan. Irfan was one of the dear colleagues and friends of DRIC, this partnering organization, and he was just disappeared one day, and the next day we found his dead body, and it's been like 12 years, and we don't know what's the reason behind it. And it's keep continuing within our situation. This is just a reference of looking into Bangladesh as a whole and the relationship of street there. This is an artist community, you see, Bangla Charukola Shilpi Songram Porishod, and they're in the street marching for the freedom movement. And it also continued with public universities in different places outside Dhaka. So these are some gatherings of Jahangirnagar University led by Renuma Ahmed, one of the many of the activists and teacher teaching in Jahangirnagar University, and they were regathering against the rape. And well, I mean, the kind of patriarchal challenge we have. So we started having these organized movements from the late 80s. And why I'm referring to Jahangirnagar University? Because it also has a link to the school. So they are directly not only teaching, we call us alliance, and we meet together for many different things. Some can be told, some cannot be said in a recorded event, but well, we keep working. But the street becomes the location for us. And these are some recent demonstrations by group of activists, but in a very much more subtle way. You can ask why there is not so many people around, because this is a pop-up presence. It's not even safe, because they're looking for the justice of for a rape and murder victim. But the guy who was accused is one of the business tycoons who easily got bail without even going to the court. But that's not the luck for everyone. This is also a very important recent event we had in the street. Students protest for safe place, but we are out there in the streets. And this happened a few years ago. The founder, Shahidul Alam, was arrested. He was actually kidnapped without a warrant, and we had no clue where he was. Next day, we found him in a jail. He had to spend like 100 days with torture. And for this Digital Security Act, which is unbailable, and the reason for taking him was like spreading defamatory information against the state or hurting the sentiment of people. So we were there again in the streets for different kind of performative gestures, protesting. But there were also some other relief moments when he was out after 100 days. We were waiting in the jail side, and then the first hug he received from his trusted friend. And then another photojournalist was taken. He was missing for 140 days. Shofikul Kajol, photojournalist. Again, defamatory act was the complaint against him. But he was found in the middle of Indian side of the border, and we don't know the reason behind it. We know, or we don't know, I don't know. But well, you see the next picture, his 20 years old young son, Polok, meeting him first time after 140 days in Joshore police station next to the border. But Pashala was also involved, school was involved in many ways for this Kajol Kothai, where is Kajol movement. Some of them are sitting here in the room. I can't tell their name in a recorded event, but it was very important work done. But this brings me closely to also the festival itself, where we had a new building now. It's like an 8-story new building of Drik Pathshala. We call it Drikpat building. And form always, somehow haunts us. We try to see, how a form informs, and its form, whether it's a format, we don't know. But we actually play around with that, and especially when we had this kind of very newly made concrete modernist building by a very famous architect, Bashirul Haq. Of course, it's a masterpiece, but at the same time, we were also feeling kind of uncomfortable getting used to it, a mango tree and a 1-story building. So there were like two kinds of conversation within the institution. And while we were deciding that in pandemic, in a difficult time, we'll have this new building for Chobi Mela. So this question came up to also think about the architecture of the group and the architecture of the building, and how you negotiate it in between while you have this special challenging edition coming. And that brings us to zero. After doing all this for like 20 years. So the pandemic happened and the situation was worse. Even the sanity was priceless for many of us, for personal loss. And also we are thinking, resource logistic wise, it's almost impossible to bring the friends, ally from the outside. It's good for the nature, environment though, right? Less fuel. But still, we were stuck. And I remember that with Natasha and many others, we had like very interesting, strong conversations, what to do next, how you act for your immediate future. We thought this has become the right time, if we really have an edition, to pay a tribute to the internal ecosystem, the ecology within, to us, just for surviving and working, and then that's just to cherish the journey of these long years. And let's go back to the basic then, the square zero. And from there, start it again. And that makes you like baggage free again from the legacy or the trust you build or a certain kind of scale you have, but how you respond to that in a very different way. How can you restart or reboot? So the idea of this crazy circle, Chobi, Mela, zero came. Zero is also vacuum, it's shunno, it's void space. And you see it's kind of having this dialoguing with the building itself with strong form. So this is the 8-story building. We were kind of desperate to have this special edition there. But there were many challenges. One was, of course, resource in the pandemic, but also for us, the challenge started way before pandemic with Shoidul's arrest. And there were bulldozers around our buildings, and it was not easy for us to actually find galleries, let alone the Shilpokal Academy, the state-run National Gallery where we used to have other editions. So again, we come down to the same challenge of necessity. We literally didn't have a space. So it was not an aesthetic choice to have this new edition or experimental edition in our building or new building. It was just, we had no other options. So we had to utilize everything there, starting from the underground parking lot, why not car lift, classroom, roof, everything, maximizing every inch. And this is the building you see, way different from the outdoor interventions. And we also invited different collectives, talking about this collective interest. So you see the staircase, where this Dagi Art Garage, young contemporary art groups are installing the work. Many are actually working with the special challenges of the building and how to extend the notion of this speciality. But what we tried also to do, to share the entire process of cooking things together in our Instagram, social media, everywhere. So that was also really important for us to expose the process constantly while we are designing, redesigning, replanning things. We thought, let's put everything out and see, what comes out. So you see, even starting from the materiality, furniture, and everything. So it was done by the big group of people. And why not also share what we eat while we design? So that was also out there, bhat, and what was there? I can read, shobji. Modest lunch for the team. I don't know that modest or not. There is also murgi. No, not modest. Aloo diye murgi. Wow. So wow. No, chicken curry with potato is not modest. No, it's fancy. Sorry, so I changed the slide quick. So you see even all the layouts. And these are not even the final layouts, but we thought we shared the journey of doing it together. And again, the festival started from a documentary practice, more towards social documentary investigative works. And now it's expanded. It was a medium-centric festival when it started, but it's growing without a direction, which is not always bad, I think. But it's more accommodative to other practices, and not necessarily arts. There are writers, architects. Of course, architects is also part of the artistic practice, but I'm just saying there are many extra disciplinary interventions in the dialogue, in the design. It's not like we are collecting artworks or objects from the artist and installing it. It's also us collaborating, having a dialogue, and trying to see a different form of the work responding towards the space. And that's why you see this photojournalistic work on the pandemic, COVID-19 in Dhaka, was installed upstairs in the rooftop space. This is in a classroom. We also exhibited a portion of Columboscope's last edition in the classroom. This is the garage parking lot. Just to prove it is a garage, I kept these photos. and then we tried to convert it to the exhibition space. But it was underground, so for us it was interesting space to look into the current time. So we exhibited this a very important work of Ronnie Sen. Many of you know about this work on the protest in the streets for the NRI movements and all. But for us it was not super easy to install the work there. There are some special people came, some visitors, unexpected visitors before the opening came. But somehow we ended up showing the work. But the same thing didn't happen in Hong Kong Photo Festival. I mean, they just clearly said no, and they had to find a different venue for a smaller presentation of the show when it was traveling to Hong Kong. So it's good to know sometimes we are slightly better than some developed places. This is also a pandemic diaristic work in COVID by Yasmin Zahan Nupur, who's not only a visual artist, she does performance, and she was weaving textile there and also taking self-portraits of her. And this is inside the studio space of the new building. This was a very important work by Naeem Mohammed and Shomari Chakma. Shomari Chakma is an exiled indigenous lawyer from Bangladesh, and she had to pay a price for her very important work recently. She was actually also publishing a book on the oral history of the people who had to, we were like forced to move away from southeast and southwest part of Bangladesh, especially from the Kaptaibad area in Rangamati, for this Pakistani government in 60s made this dam, and so massive amount of people had to move, and we still don't know the trace of how many people moved to where. But what she did, she started traveling in northeast part of India and Bangladesh and interviewing different generations, and also this recording was translated into a book form, and the book became this kind of oral recitation of the book in 2 languages, this colonial Bangla by Naeem next to the Chakma language. And we thought, this was actually a Zoom conversation setup. And this is where we are actually preparing for it. But when we invited Naeem, we know his artistic practice, but we really wanted to cook something else, and that's why Shomari, who was not into visual art, collaborated for something which stays back as a very important part of the history. And we work with a peanut, very small budget, but for us commissioning means that, how it gets afterlife and survives for its own politics and purpose, and not always contextualized in art setting. So Chobi Mela Shunno started finally in a smaller setup. But it was also not the lack of the locations outside. It was very unsafe for us to work outside, not for the pandemic, but for some other reasons too, when we are not so favored for the state after lots of different events happened. But again, so that gave us a very interesting dilemma. We were kind of used to operating in a space like Old Dhaka, and then we had to think twice to have the safety to operate outside. So that means, we still want to have a safe place, but more in an interior. But the exterior is not a safe place for us anymore. So that complexity is always there for us to work in Dhaka now. But this is the library of Pathshala, where we said this Kolkata City of Print project, archiving project. And it was a starting point. This exhibition actually helped us to land into this city of Dhaka project to see the other part of the Bengal and the local printing practice. And it was part of Shunno, and that's how we exhibited the work. But trying to see the local printing methods and publishing houses who mostly produce books for children's school. So this design was made by Bashirul Haq, the architect of the building, and he sadly passed away in pandemic. And this was his last project, this 3-part building. So he also exhibited his work so that the young artist can have this dialogue with his vision. We tried out everything in Chobi Mela Shunno. We are like super ambitious because, I mean, we really wanted to test that limitlessness while we are limited with everything. So we had this Baba Betar, this radio project, and that helped us to also look for other things, translating very important text and having readings and songs and poetry recitation. And Baba Betar was a part of Shunno, but it also continued in social media, Facebook after it in the pandemic time. We had podcast series. Some of you in the room were part of it. There is Natasha's conversation, Tanvi, and this is Baba Betar in classroom. So the classroom was converted towards the radio station, and we still have dark room. It's part of the curricular of Pathshala where they still try alternative prints. It was also used for exhibitions. That brings us to curriculum, but also it's sometimes extracurricular, always trying to see the extra part bit of it. But education, learning is a very important space for us, not only for the holistic notion of learning and knowledge production, but it's also a very important instrument to think about something that you really want to communicate about. And children gets the priority. So this is one of the early photos of out of focus children. So it was a children's collective initiated by Shahidul Alam, and kids who are not getting privilege were part of it, and it continued in an amazing way. And some of the alumni are Pathshala faculties, working in different radio stations, learning different skills of media journalism. Old Pathshala campus, which was actually a house, and then we converted into a school, but the school was also often converting into exhibition spaces, and this was after this Rana Plaza Garments collapse. 1134 was the title of the show, and we invited school-going children from the neighborhood. So children are also a community of interest for us, but some of the projects are really complicated. But this traditional notion of, deciding or editing some works out, thinking of, the content doesn't work for us. Like this particular project was also in the parking lot underground of Brick Part while it was under construction. And this is a very sensitive project. It's on the indigenous children who were harassed, sexually harassed by the military forces, and exposing their identity was not a sensible decision, and that's why the artist Ashfika Rahman, who's also an alumni of Pathshala, she tried to weave different forms, which also, these motifs are coming from the indigenous practice, and the language you see are surrounded with the portraits. So just not to give it an artistic solution, but also to make it publishable. But the children were actually viewing the work. Okay. So this extracurricular is now continuing outside Pathshala's premise. We recently had exhibition in Istanbul Biennale. And we just continued to have the dialogue, and it was more like a tribute to the alliance we have, and who always collaborated with us in different forms, how they can actually take a part of the school space in Istanbul Biennale and talk about the most pressing issue around the indigenous movement now. Here comes Naim and Shomari Chakma again from this Chobi Mela work. And the photo you see at the right side is super important for us because the white cutout you see is of Kalpana Chakma, the important young female activist from indigenous community who is missing, still missing now. No clue of her, and it's never so easy to talk about her. And she's standing in front of the parliament building. So for us again, talking about place making. It's very interesting conflict. And this body of work was made by Shahidul from the archive. And we also set up this Gono Shanghati Andolon's office inside Istanbul Biennale, where you see this left-inclined political group is always hitting the street to talk about the labor rights movements, especially the garment workers movement. And one of their members is a faculty and alumni of Pathshala, Taslima Akhtar. If you remember, she was holding the placard of Shahidul. And Taslima is a very important member of the community, but she also brings this extended community of allies, Gono Shanghati. They're a political group, but it's very interesting for us to see, where the school goes beyond the confined network. 2 minutes. I'm almost there. So you see there's a table set up. And this is Taslima in the street. These are archives from the missing worker who went missing in this Rana Plaza collapse, and many were actually not found or not. Yeah. So this is a body of work on the bloggers killing. And there's a performative piece by Ritu Sattar, who's also a very close ally working with us for a long time, and in different capacity. And this is a piece where you see this traditional harmonium, but they're only creating the noise and there is no harmony in it. And it talks about the time now of any kind of open freedom of expression situation. And many bloggers actually recently got lynched, killed. Some of them are friends. Oh, I'm going back? Oh, why didn't you tell me? Okay. So the last thing, just in a minute. So this is resonance. Nuances sometimes, but we always think, how we can be regenerative as a group, so that, finding different frequencies where we change roles, and how others pick up and respond in terms of curation, teaching, and that's why recently when we were invited by this Biennale for Aktule in Mannheim, Heidelberg. We are now, it's Shahidul Alam, me, and Munem Wasif. So we three are now curating that next edition, which is scheduled for 2024. And we are in a very early stage of cooking, but we are thinking about these shifting frequencies, finding new frequencies of resonance, borrowing from this sonic experience of seeing, how sound creates noise and when sound creates melody, and where is things in between, and how two sounds work together in harmony and sometimes without harmony. And also we are trying to see how even in the pandemic, issues like mutation, residue, leakages, and many things actually affected not only our mind, our body, and playing around with the words. But again, having this recent experience from Chobi Mela Shunno, for us it's really important to see the locality there and how to connect. So trying to mapping and remapping the city and seeing who's the community of interest, and not looking for audience building, but working with existing people who don't go to the Biennale but live in the same city, share the same street, but don't want to go to the Biennale or gallery. And how you do that, I don't know, but these are some of the concerns we have. And the last slide I will show is this. One of the artists of Chobi Mela, Abir Shom, installed the work. We often now in these discussions talk about language, and I really like this, which also defines what Chobi Mela is. Hard English everywhere. And in Bangla, It's written একটু বোকা লোকের মারির দাঁত একটা. How do you translate it, Pratik? Anyone? Volunteers? To translate? Give it a try. Yeah.
Silly man's
Wow. Hard English everywhere. But yeah, so Chobi Mela is a silly man street now. Thank you.
Yeah, your presentation was so clear. I feel like you answered some of my questions already. Trying to think back to what I want to start with. Perhaps we can start on the note of regional alliances, but then also lateral possibilities. So on one hand, what it means to work in this way to deepen the local relationships and relationships that have also emerged out of the geopolitical complexity of Bangladesh as a place in the region, but then at the same time in parallel, constantly having built these regional alliances and whether that is through a form of mentorship, but then also through sort of just in terms of how Chobi Mela has been an early model for festival production that has inspired so many other contexts. So if we could just ponder on that a bit and how you then see its role today from sort of this point zero. Yeah.
Well, I mean, mentorship is an interesting word. I mean, we have become kind of old festival in 20 years, but at the same time, it's mostly the body which is aging. And we don't really want to think it in that kind of hierarchical position of having more experience or scale-wise. You see others emerging festival are growing. We don't want to see that. It's not so smooth and clear sometimes. People know the festival, and that created a very different kind of expectation. And that's why Chobi Mela Shunno was an effort of being really self-critical and brutally honest towards yourself and see, what is most important you need to carry on. How to stay relevant. And that's a reminder we sometimes give to each other. And I think any sort of solidarity, solidarity starts first before the cooperation. It requires equal footing of respect, when Brooke was talking about this respect. And that's why it's super important to realize that, you always need to stay in the ground. And also be really frank on seeing how we can explore collective resources in a more geopoetic way than geopolitical way. There are many different kind of collective resources that many others can claim. And that's why letting few things go is really important. And it starts from your own structure, infrastructure or architecture of your initiative. And that's why it's not always like formal partnerships. Sometimes we invite other peoples to do something within the festival. Like the collateral in Chobi Mela is equally important than the main events, because that's a space ground when Chobi Mela is challenged by the collaterals.
I was also hoping we could go a little bit more into the idea of the curriculum and the extracurricular in terms of just what that space of pedagogy has done to extend the understanding of image making, image production, public images in that context. And also, though, what it means then to formalize, because we've been talking about this as well, of how once that curriculum becomes formalized and the school is not the tree school, it's far more established. So how does the curriculum maybe still continue to have a toned muscle and not become this sort of, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I think curriculum itself has its own stagnant position when it's always, written formal format or formal curriculum, you can say, and that's why also Chobi Pathshala is recently affiliated by Dhaka University. So that's an interesting change we have. So we now have the BSS program, Bachelor's in Social Science. Is a 4-year-long honors program, graduation program. So it's a formal course. So there is this formal curriculum always as a school, which is published, printed, and written. But there are unwritten curriculums. And recently, when we had this conversation with Istanbul Biennale, especially with Amar Kanwar, we went through this amazing conversation that, how is this extra curriculum is visible and invisible. And that also brought us to the idea of building an absent curriculum. And this absent curriculum is not only talking about the absence of the learning materials, but also absence of trace of any tangible materials, because many of the projects done by the alumni and many allies are looking into something which is missing. It could be a missing figure, body, absence in that way. And that was also reflected in extra curriculum. So for us, breaking this notion of traditional formal curriculum and taking this ambiguous step into, just dissecting the curriculum is also part of a curriculum.
Are there questions already? Yes.
Ruchi and Sharanya.
Sorry, this is a somewhat localized question, so people from outside Bengal will forgive. I've been talking a lot to Naeem recently. He's working on maybe he's already printed it in Bangla, an article on the differences between, after partition, what happens in West Bengal and East Pakistan, Bangladesh, in terms of photographic histories and photographic resources, right? And it's his theory. I'm actually stealing from him with acknowledgement, because he started thinking about this, and I'm not sure that I agree. I want to know what you think. Is that at partition, a lot of the photographic infrastructure or resources or traditions kind of stay behind in West Bengal, and East Pakistan has very little, very sparse in terms of photographic, as compared perhaps with theatre or dance or music or even painting perhaps. But definitely photography is not such a big thing in Dhaka or Chittagong or the other cities, small towns and the villages, etc. And so therefore, there was a kind of almost like a fallow ground in terms of photography, or a much more sparse landscape I'll call it East and West, just for now, in the East than in the West. And my question is, would you agree with that? And would you agree that, or do you think that that is why a completely fresh approach of the kind that has not actually happened in India, or definitely not happened in Bengal, where we've been caught up in much more conservative forms of the salon and a certain kind of pictoriality or a certain kind of photojournalistic sort of fetishization of photojournalism almost in photography. Whereas in Bangladesh, especially with the initiatives of, Chobi, Mela, Drake, Pathshala, all of this cluster, that a quite radical, very different kind of photography was able to sprout, because that ground was not over harvested, if you like, with the history of image making, lens-based image making. Yeah. Would that make sense to you?
Yes, in a way, and that's what I was just saying, we started with a very strong feeling of necessity when we saw a discontinuity of photographic education. But at the same time, I'm saying yes in a way, because that's also an official history, you can say. I mean, the medium itself, I think the strength of it is its democratic approach. And there is this amazing base of amateur practitioners who are equally doing very important work. I mean, quote unquote amateur. But I think these small forums and groups were never highlighted and looked into as an example or model. And that's why I think the photographic journey in Bangladesh, right, before the independence towards these 50 years, is quite happening, intense, and it produced so many important work, and those were like very time responsive works. And even the 71 was documented so well. So, I mean, in terms of production and practice, you can say there is no discontinuity. In terms of formal education, yes, and maybe that's why it's better not to have formal education sometimes.
Sorry, just a follow-up thing. The other question I had was that I think photography becomes a lot more democratic once the digital camera, in whatever shape or form, comes into our lives, right? Because earlier you had to have a dark room and film and a camera which you knew how to handle, and to be able to afford film and processing and printing. Either you did it yourself or you had to get it done anywhere in the subcontinent. But with the coming of the digital photo equipment, doesn't photography then become more democratic and more radical immediately almost, would you say?
Yeah, difficult. I mean, yes or no. I mean, of course, digital makes it easy in terms of process, but it's expensive, the gears there. I mean, digital professional equipment and all the settings, like, this computer lab, you say, was super important for Pathshala to build it, because we knew many of the students enrolled didn't even have a laptop or to work for the post-production. So it's a technical answer, but I'm still telling you, digital has this notion of something very
I just felt that a lot more people can take photographs, not necessarily art or high quality photographs.
Yeah, but that's
photographic
happening.
thinking can spread, no?
That has spread. I mean, even for lots of different practice and social movements. In social media, you see lots of important works are out, and people are self-publishing. So that's a long conversation, but it's happening. Yeah. But I think for photography itself, always had, as a medium, if you go back to this history, it always had this transitional moment of technical invention, right? I mean, it's always having this kind of struggle, you can say.
Thank you. Thanks. That was just really nice to learn about everything you're doing. I had a question to Tanzim, but also to, I guess, all of you. This is something I think about, and Rana Ayub, who's a senior colleague to me, and a lot of us, she said last year, where she was like this kind of romanticization of the brave reporter. Like, you always see this, where you're like, reporters are fearless and reporters are brave, but a lot of journalists don't go into it to be revolutionaries. Like, they go into it to report what they see. And today, because of the way truth functions, it just happens to be that it becomes like a dissent, but that's, and I feel like a lot of resistance is labor, and a lot, like all, and it's almost, sometimes it becomes kind of, this is a very long way to get to my question, but it becomes almost like kind of romanticization of artists and writers and journalists who are putting their life on the line and their body on the line, as you are, as Saidul Sahab, everybody is. And I think my question is that when something happens, when they're taken into detention, when the state intervenes, and I know there's collectives, but then how much responsibility do galleries or like curators or international galleries, people who do profit off the work of artists, like have for legal counsel or to protect them? Because, collectivity is one thing, but legal counsel is expensive, and like governments are very harsh. So I wonder how that works, like that kind of advocacy, and if these kind of like big biennales and big time like Western galleries, like, do they intervene and do they take responsibility, because everyone is benefiting from these works, right? So I was curious as to how that works.
Yeah. No, I think this is super timely conversation we're having, right? And that's why yesterday we talked about law, judicial support, legal support, and also facilitating it, housing it in a space like a gallery. And it clearly shows that how we are reorganizing ourselves and not living within the bubble of a certain network and industry. Right. I mean, it's also not only the responsibility of the, I think, art settings, but art settings, we are negotiating hard. We are also reminding that they're part of the game, they're part of the process. But at the same time, I mean, every other forums, legal forums, including the school itself, Pathshala, And that's why talking about curriculum, we are thinking a lot about, seeing how, it's missing art history. I mean, it has art history, it has a photographic practice and theories on social reading, but it doesn't have this basic small one single document talking about legal issues and the legal ground. Well, many are not only hitting the street and protesting and doing political works, even for its basic investigative works. And also, it's not only journalism, and now some of the experimental artworks are coming from this notion that you can't investigate in a different way, then how you can work with the ambiguity. And this, instrumentalizing even ambiguity doesn't help. Because there's also a counterproductive way, I mean, when the Digital Security Act talks about defamatory information, it could be anything, or hurting the sentiment, it could be anything. So swimming in that ocean, doesn't give clarity for any ends, and it helps some people to fishing better. And that's why I think, this notion of art space and ambiguity there, no, I mean, the judicial is very important skill to have at this point.
So is there kind of like, and I wish, but is there legal counsel sort of provided to people when you're, like legal education, because I never got it when I was being trained in any way. So I was wondering, like, is that something that you think about to tell people how to navigate?
Of course, unofficially, yes. There are lots of alliance forums, lawyers who are actually helping us throughout, and because the way number is increasing with these cases, it's unbelievable. So it's happening, but I'm just saying how the school adapts it, in a formal setting of classroom. It's something yet to be done, to be super honest.
Thank you.
I mean, we can also take up this question in the general discussion. We can, keep it in mind, for sure. Thank you.
There's a question there. Let's get, Josh, let's go here first.
Hello. This question is actually comes from a concern, and I wanted to understand, like, you showed one of the photo where indigenous children were raped, right? And I was a bit curious on who was making it and what was the motivation behind making it, because there is like very long history of artists sexualizing women's bodies, indigenous women's bodies. So,
yeah, no, it's a very important question, honestly speaking. But it was made by Ashfika Rahman, who was a Pashala student, Bengali, Bangladeshi, very important, female photographer. And her mother is working in an NGO who's working very closely with the people who are trying to file case but cannot. So it's coming from that deep engagement and research. But in terms of representation, your question is still very important and valid. As long as we have this conversation with her, from her motivation comes from, making a work and publishing which is against the military. And it's absolute taboo in a situation of Bangladesh to even raise any word and question against cantonment area. So this is where, her politics was lying that, what brings in a certain kind of visual form of presentation which actually questions of the military regime in a democratic setup. So that was our intention behind it.
how much of agency did the indigenous people themselves had, and then how much of credit and then intellectual ownership were they getting in this work, particular work?
Yeah, that's the important question. She is, as long as I know, she is in these conversations, and this was a mutual consent of taking this position of, showing the work, giving it this particular form, was mutually decided together. As these people, these particular persons are also trying to file the case together with her mother. So in that sense, this legal safety conversation and the conversation of their comfort for representation is being discussed still.
Yeah, so maybe we can continue in the Q&A,
Yeah.
but it's very, very sensitive
Yeah,
area, right? And then there's entire history of like colonial history, upper castes like Paul Gauguin going to the indigenous communities and sexualizing and abusing like women and trans people. And then if you also actually type indigenous woman just in Google, like you see all the sexualized photos. So it's actually very, very sensitive area. And I was like, I mean, we can talk more in Q&A.
The taken, very important question. I don't have an answer, but it's such an important question. Taken.
One more and then we'll...
Question there. Just pass it there.
I initially wanted to ask the question that Silasa asked. I will continue from there. Those photos are also shown to the children, as we have seen. So this is a difficult topic. There, it also comes with a lot of moral gatekeeping of what the children should be exposed to and should not be to. So how do you navigate a space around that? Because as coming from the same thing, she mentioned Paul Gauguin, I can mention multiple Bengali writers and photographers who has done sexualizing children and women, especially indigenous children, like famous people like Buddhadev Bosu, who like famously sexualized indigenous women in his writing. And
Santhal communities.
yes.
Even currently, Devarati Mukhopadhyay's work is a massive controversy, and she's a government official as well as a celebrated author. Very, and she has, I'm not certain if she has sexualized, but she has very derogatorily described the Naga community and set her entire detective thriller based on those defamatory claims and humanizing claims. And when called out by a indigenous person, she said various, there was no apology. So this is a, this will remain a very difficult topic. Yes.
And at the end,
Like in the Nepali artists also, the university over here also sexualizing indigenous bodies.
Also
Sorry, just in order to, I just want you all to speak in the mic if you don't mind, but maybe we let one person finish, if that's okay. Just to, yeah.
So when these photos are shown to the children, does the children understand?
Yeah, that's a super important question. But when we actually show the work, there are some small mediation exchanges where we have conversations and also publications and books, which talks about the situations for children in other places. In terms of keeping that solidarity in mind, but it goes to that detail of brutality by keeping the children in mind. But at the same time, the indigenous struggle is completely disconnected from urban setting and Dhaka setting. We can question the representation of the visual, and I completely agree with that, and it needs more conversations and a critical lens on it. I totally agree. And more sensibility on looking into what to add and what not to add in a display setting. But at the same time, the children's conversation doesn't look into the specifics of the brutality, but it introduces a situation where they are getting more aware about the situation that's in a very close distance, is not being heard, not being felt, and not been seen for a long time in the mainstream education conversations.
Right. I just want to say something. So with lens-based practice, all of us know how violent it has been with indigenous communities from this very anthropological approach itself, where we were recorded as some beast and all of that. That history is there for everyone to know and understand. So there's always a discomfort when we are photographed, and of late, not of very late, but in contemporary art practices in South Asia, I see that the only representation of indigenous women is when non-indigenous people talk about sexually, vulnerable women, brutalized by military, the likes of Amar Kanwar, etc. And I mean, what is the responsibility of a curator, an artist there then? Like, you know, when you know you're not from the community and you only speak about this aspect, indigenous women are more than,
Of
you know,
course.
raped bodies.
course,
Like,
of
no, we
course.
are so much more, and I don't know.
No, I totally agree with you. Totally
Yeah.
agree with you. on that.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and also, I mean, like, can we,
Yeah, but let's
Also,
kind
just
of
like-
finish and then go into the next.
like, to add to that also, like, can we also get the space that is afforded to like non-indigenous women when they are raped and when they are brutalized, like, you know, the kind of protection and the safety that they are given? Like, what is the art world going to need to allow us that space where we can just be like, no, you know, this is a space we do not want to talk about. We do not want our children to be photographed and be exhibited because they are abused. Like, you know, it might be something sensational for you, but for us it's a wound. And yeah, no.
So I just want to acknowledge that also, unfortunately, the photographer and an artist is not with us.
That's true.
Just also want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I was only sharing with you because you being the curator, you should also have
No,
a
of course.
certain
Yeah.
sense of responsibility and unlearning, because like it or not, we also make an audience and we also
Yeah.
like are working together. And if you're looking to be allies and collaborators, then
Yeah.
I'm thankful for this space where I can say that this is a wound and it is bothering me and it shouldn't be. So
Totally, totally, and that's why I'm just saying I don't have an immediate answer, but I'm not unresponsive. I totally take your point that it's a responsibility of a curator, honestly speaking, and I'm really feeling sorry about it. But you know, it's that's the part of it, you know, to just sometimes accept and also to push each other and remind.
Yeah.
Can we give her the mic, please?
I'd just like to add a little bit to that. These questions around representation and image making is something that we think about a lot. Something that we've come to is that this question of representation is quite unresolved, and it's an evolving conversation, because something that you can see in Ashfika's work, and she isn't here so I'm not speaking on her behalf, is that you can see the wrestle that there is in trying to find that language of a manner of representation of something that is not being discussed. Having been in a journalistic institution for a while, we were always wrestling with this question when there is immense atrocity going on. Do you put the story out or not? And it is always a very difficult conversation, and we do give that agency to the people whom we are reporting on. And if those people would like for their voices to be heard, and this was something that also came out during the Me Too movement of anonymity versus non-anonymity, that is somewhere we have these conversations in these forums, but I think the work that the reporter, photographer does with the people that they are interacting with, I can see some of that wrestle in the images of her trying to bring in indigenous motifs, those conversations of anonymity, trying to maintain a human presence and not show identity, the language that is surrounding the image. This is not to say that one may not be hurt by it. Also the community is not homogeneous, so some people in the community may have different reactions. So I just wanted to say that some of that struggle was visible, but also something that you said that I didn't know was that her mother is fighting the legal case, which complicates also the situation, because in a way they are sort of reliant on her to fight for their struggle. So is consent really, where does consent lie? So these conversations are super important, but just to say that they're kind of evolving, and I could just, think on part of the artists, because I work with a few artists who do wrestle with this question. It's not really an easy solution to come to. But
So, okay.
like, this thing about consent, that like once you give consent to your images being used in a certain exhibition, does not mean that you've consented to it being used in have you taken an informed consent from the parents and the child that the images would be shown in this particular like hub. You haven't, right? Like I'm just imagining, I don't know. But yeah, like what does consent mean, especially when you're talking about sexual violence? Because I don't know, it's a serious thing and it's going to stay there, it's going to be archived, and I don't know what consent means in this. And people should also have the ability to like take the consent back. Like, you know, you may be thinking and you may be like you may have consented under certain pressures as indigenous peoples in a colonized land, especially Chakma people, people from the northeast, people here in Darjeeling. We are contesting like brutality every single day. They cannot be consent without coercion when our images are being used. So I don't know, I'm very critical of this space. And you cannot think about consent when you're talking about consent within indigenous communities, that it's going to be consent that you imagine. Like it's not, we are not free, we are like still enslaved. And so no, consent is not just like a one person's responsibility. It has to come with community and care and love, and you have to do a lot of work. It's we can't just show images of like, oh, the military brutalized all these women and it's going to go to Documenta, it's going to go to this place and da 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 da, and it's going to travel all across Europe, and no, it's heavy. And I think like before like the non-indigenous people comment on this, you have to do unlearning. So like first like unlearn and do some work, and then like we can talk about it. But
All right, now I'm very glad that you've shared this, but I also want to take a little bit of like just kind of creating space around all of us to bring this into conversation and relation with a lot of other things that have brought into the room. Because yes, I think, you know, this prompt feels urgent, but as you've said, it's also slow work, it's long work, it's work that's gonna need all of our energies and all of our, also hopefully, our patience and labor with each other, right? That's my only wish, and I think that's what's allowed us to sustain this space year after year, because clearly it's not just a certain kind of resource. And I think I'm so grateful for all of this, because I really feel like what's happened year after year, and it's thanks to everyone here really, is that over these 12 years, the questions that are thrown in are somehow some of the most essential, crucial, painful, that need to be thrown into the room, that need to be shared with each other. And that's what I think also what Cabello sort of started with, of like listening to ourselves and listening with each other. It's so much about that. And I kind of love how, in a way, this, like I knew the room is the room is listening. This room is listening. And you know, so it's not even about, this just showed it so clearly. It's like, it's not like we have to be like, oh, we have 10 questions for each other, which we do. And someone else, I think Ruchir was like, you know, it's even going to take time to formulate our questions, because we're listening, we're here with you. We're really here with you. Everyone is here, present, and I think questioning themselves too. So yeah, I just want to acknowledge that together, and really, kind of again feel the luxury and the pain of it, the luxury to be able to be here, the pain of being here, and thank you to Tanzim for being so generous and for accepting and for taking it all, absorbing it all in as well. Also, we are in this moment, which is the most significant one, of having our group conversation. So that's pretty much where we have landed. So it would be great if y'all are okay with it to kind of come together, and we can sit in whatever formation works. But to have the audience now sort of speak with and raise their questions and thoughts. We're just, I don't know, Priyanka?
Yeah,
No, I think so too, because Brooke will be leaving at about 4:15, 20. So we would then get him
Yeah.
as part of this, and we can break for tea after the group conversation because we see. I can actually get some.
Can we
tea
have
served
tea
here?
here? Yeah. Let's do that.
Tea served inside.
Let's have
So
tea here and let's sit.
How we've done
Yeah.
this in the past is now we break all formality, all this sort of projection and everything is gone, and all of us come quite close, as you feel comfortable, of course. And all of the participating curators sit on this side, on the floor. I'll move all the chairs.